Of course, here's a dramatic draft for Forged in Silence, Crowned in War, humanity's relentless rise amid the ruins of alien dreams. Forged in Silence, Crowned in War, humanity's relentless rise amid the ruins of alien dreams. For centuries, Earth lay beneath the indifferent gaze of the stars, unknown to its inhabitants. Civilizations older than history itself watched and wagered. Alien empires, masters of worlds and architects of galaxies, played their games across the void. Humanity was a footnote, a primitive curiosity, and then, a growing threat. Their dreams, woven across solar systems, faltered when they underestimated the one force they could not comprehend, the stubborn, furious will of mankind. Forged in silence, humanity's ascent did not begin with grand declarations. It began in secrecy. After the first brutal contact, the shattering of New Kyoto, Earth's leaders understood, survival demanded unity and innovation beyond imagination. Beneath shattered cities and poisoned skies, mankind hammered itself into something new. Gone were the old nations, the old squabbles. What emerged was a species no longer bound by borders or ideologies but by a single purpose: to endure, to adapt, and eventually, to conquer. Scientists worked in underground vaults, splicing alien technology with human ingenuity. Soldiers were remade into something more, armored titans capable of waging war in atmospheres not their own. Fleets were built in hidden orbital shipyards, silent leviathans drifting just beyond alien sight. Humanity vanished into the dark, only to re-emerge, terrible and unrecognizable. Crowned in war, the silence shattered. Across dying stars and crumbling ringworlds, the galaxy learned the truth. Humanity would not be a subject, a pet, or a forgotten relic. It would be a storm. It began with the Siege of Tauros, where human dreadnoughts tore apart a species 10,000 years old. It continued with the Battle of the Silent Moons, where guerrilla marines turned an entire sector into a graveyard. Every engagement was a warning written in blood and wreckage. Humanity was here to stay, and it was angry. The oldest races tried to unite. Treaties were signed, fleets gathered, superweapons readied, but it was too late. What they faced was not a rogue nation or a rebellious world. It was a species that had been forged in desperation and crowned by conflict, one that had learned from every defeat and fed on every setback. Empires collapsed, thrones built over millennia burned, and where once the proudest alien dreams soared, there now rose the flag of humanity, battered, patched, but unbroken. In the end, the ruins of alien ambition paved the way for a new dominion. Not of gods, not of monsters, but of humanity, relentless, furious, and free. Would you like a slightly longer, more cinematic version too? Maybe like the opening of a novel or a full chapter? I could also do a version that's more poetic, historical, or journalistic depending on the vibe you're going for. Here's the next part of the story, continuing the rise of humanity amid the ruins of alien empires. Part 2, Embers of the Fallen. The universe, vast and ancient, was not a place of mercy. It never had been. But even in its indifferent expanse, a profound truth was becoming apparent. Humanity, once a fleeting dream among the stars, had become a fire that could not be extinguished. As the dust settled from the wars, the stars themselves seemed to bend under the weight of human ambition. The once great alien civilizations, whose names were whispered with awe in the ancient archives, were now nothing more than fractured legacies, scattered across the ruins. Their technology, though advanced beyond human comprehension, had become tools in the hands of a species that was still learning to master the art of survival. Humanity, unlike the empires that had risen and fallen before them, did not have the luxury of time. They had no ancient traditions to rely on, no galactic mandates to follow. What they had was grit, adaptability, and an unyielding drive to carve their place in the cosmos. The harvest of Cthor was the first true sign that humanity was no longer a fleeting anomaly in the galactic order. Cthor had once been an empire of cold calculation, its people gifted with unparalleled mastery over quantum engineering. They were the masters of space, bending the very fabric of reality to their will. But when their fleet met humanity's first combined assault force, it was not the advanced technology that made the difference. It was the human will, the refusal to accept defeat, and the relentless ingenuity that turned the tide. For every alien weapon system, humanity found a way to adapt. Where their fleets met annihilation, humanity rebuilt faster. The Cthor had never seen the likes of it. Their great cities, once gleaming with the pride of millennia, were leveled in a week. The Talon of the Andrus Reach, an ancient warship feared across 1,000 systems, was taken by human hands, its systems stripped and repurposed. What had been a symbol of an empire's greatest power now became a symbol of humanity's triumph, a reminder that the galaxy, once thought to be a playground for the gods, was now open to anyone who dared to challenge it. But for all their victories, the cost was high. Entire generations of humans had been sacrificed in the blood-soaked fields of war, and the galaxy itself had been irrevocably scarred. The Epoch of Silence followed, a period where the remnants of the old empires, now leaders of shattered alliances, plotted their revenge. The great galactic halls once filled with the elegant voices of diplomats were now silent, their halls haunted by broken treaties and shattered ambitions. The Galactic Council had no answers. Its bureaucratic power, once absolute, crumbled beneath the weight of the humans' rise. What was once a united front of races now fractured into warlords and scavengers, as the last vestiges of power fled to the corners of the galaxy, desperately trying to avoid the inevitable. And yet, humanity did not relent. They created their own councils, their own laws. They carved empires from the ashes of the old. They looked to the stars not as mere travelers but as conquerors, destined to reshape the very fabric of the universe to suit their will. The once great Valiros dynasty, an alien race whose philosophers had once dared to ponder the meaning of the cosmos, was reduced to a fractured remnant on the barren world of Velarin. Their grand halls of thought became tombs, abandoned by a species whose arrogance had led them to miscalculate the power of the human spirit. The last Valiros elder, an ancient being who had once whispered about the inevitability of the universe's end, now knelt before a human commander, offering nothing but surrender. In the halls of human power, the crown had not been passed through ancient bloodlines or divine right. It was forged in the fire of war. The leadership of humanity was not decided by birth or destiny but by strength, cunning, and the ability to endure. Empress Naya Valros, the first leader to truly unite humanity under a single banner, stood as the figurehead of the new order. But even she was more a symbol of the will of the people than any divine monarch. Her rise had been a testament to humanity's adaptability. From the ashes of the war-ravaged world of Naren III, she had built an empire through sheer willpower, uniting fragmented human factions through a vision that promised survival and prosperity at any cost. Under her rule, humanity's new fleet was birthed, a titanic armada that dwarfed the legendary warships of the ancient empires. The Phoenix Legion, as it was known, was a blend of human resourcefulness and the salvaged remnants of fallen alien technologies. The fleet was designed. Here's the next part of the story, delving deeper into humanity's new role in the galaxy and the challenges they face as they try to establish their dominion. Part 3, The Weight of the Stars. The galaxy was vast, ancient, and mysterious. Beneath its cold light, humanity stood as both conqueror and fledgling. Despite their victories, the endless stretch of space held secrets far darker than anything they had yet encountered. The war-torn galaxy that they had inherited was not a blank slate but a battleground littered with remnants of ancient powers, each with its own buried history and untold dangers. The crown of the Phoenix Legion was a symbol of humanity's brutal ascension, but it was also a heavy burden. Empress Naya Valros, once a symbol of hope and unity, now faced the grim reality that not all of her people had embraced the new empire with the same fervor. Beneath the surface of the prosperous cities, tensions brewed. Not all who fought in the siege of Twaros or the Battle of the Silent Moons had done so willingly. Many still remembered the shattered world they had lost, the families they had buried in the aftermath, the moral compromises made for the sake of survival. Even within the Phoenix Legion, cracks began to show. The once unyielding loyalty to the Empress was tested by questions of justice, freedom, and the true cost of conquest. General Harlan Voss, once a hero on the battlefield and now a seasoned commander, found himself haunted by memories of the innocent lives lost in their rise to power. For every alien city they had raised, there were human survivors who had been displaced, who sought their own place in this new order, and those survivors were not always grateful. The fragmented realms, a collection of human colonies on the outer rim, refused to bow to the centralized government. They had built their lives on the fringes, where the remnants of alien technology offered freedom and opportunity. Their leaders, the so-called rogue governors, believed that humanity's future did not lie in the heart of the empire but in the unexplored frontier, where the rule of the Phoenix Legion could not reach. These outer colonies became a hotbed of rebellion. They were fed by ideals of independence, promises of self-determination, and the bitter taste of oppression. Harlan Voss, caught between the directive of Empress Valros and the realities of the frontier, found himself in a delicate position. Should he crush the resistance and solidify the Empire's power, or listen to the voices of those who believed that humanity's true future lay in the untamed unknown? Beyond the reach of the Phoenix Legion, other ancient powers stirred. The Astral Pact, a coalition of alien races that had once been united in opposition to humanity's rise, had fractured into disparate factions. Some sought to negotiate with the new empire, offering alliances in exchange for peace. Others, more dangerous, began to gather forces in secret, plotting revenge against the humans they had underestimated. The Seraphim, a race of synthetic beings once considered the ultimate achievement in artificial intelligence, had quietly rebuilt their armies in the shadows of forgotten star systems. Their minds were vast, their intellects incomprehensible, but it was their cold, calculating nature that made them such formidable adversaries. In the quiet of the galactic abyss, their ships began to appear once more, sleek and silent, built for war and for annihilation. The Shatterers of Irith, a once feared race of conquerors, had fled to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, hiding in the forgotten nebulae. But their hatred for humanity burned deep, and they had not forgiven the loss of their empire, nor the humiliation at the hands of human forces. Their vengeance would be swift, brutal, and without mercy. Humanity had become a force to be reckoned with, but in doing so, it had awoken something older and far more dangerous. The galaxy was not at peace, it had never been. And so, the galaxy waited, in silence. Silence before the storm. The Empress of the Phoenix Legion and her empire now stood at a precipice. To maintain their power, they would have to crush the rising rebellions and confront the growing threat of the ancient powers who watched from the dark edges of space. For the first time in centuries, humanity faced the challenge of preserving their newfound crown, not just through war, but through diplomacy, loyalty, and the delicate art of governance. The Empire's path was unclear. Would they dominate the stars and become a new force of order? Or would they, too, be consumed by the darkness that had already claimed so many? One thing was certain, the silence was over, and the war for the future of the galaxy was far from finished. Would you like to continue this further into the complexities of the galactic politics, the unknown threats that remain, or perhaps an intense showdown between the factions? Here's the next chapter, delving deeper into the rising tensions, the political struggles, and the imminent confrontations that humanity must face as it tries to solidify its power in the galaxy. Part 4, The Storm's Eye. The silence was now a fragile thing, and every whisper of rebellion or alien threat seemed to reverberate through the very heart of humanity's empire. The Phoenix Legion had conquered the stars, but they had not conquered their own hearts, and in the hollow spaces between their victories, cracks were starting to form. The cost of empire was becoming evident. Not in the frontiers where humanity's might was tested, but in the quiet chambers of power, where the true battles of the future would unfold. Empress Naya Valros, once the triumphant leader who had united humanity under one banner, now stood at a crossroads. Her empire was vast, spanning multiple star systems and countless colonies, yet it was fracturing beneath the weight of its own ambition. The fringe worlds, the fragmented realms, refused to bow. They called for autonomy, for freedom from the central government that had imposed a new order upon them. The central government's promise of unity through war had left these colonies feeling nothing but the cold hand of control. Yet, it was not rebellion from the frontier alone that threatened the empire's unity. Within the heart of the empire itself, factions arose. Some, like the Sentinel Council, argued that humanity's future lay in securing peace with the remaining alien empires, seeking diplomatic solutions to avoid a new wave of galactic war. They spoke of alliances, trade, and the potential for a future where humanity stood as a dominant force, but one that used diplomacy rather than force. On the other side of the argument were the Steel Lords, generals and war-hardened leaders who believed that humanity's strength lay in maintaining a posture of constant military dominance. They feared that any sign of weakness or mercy would be seen as an invitation for the ancient powers to strike. To them, the galaxy was a place of predators, and only through unyielding force could humanity survive. And then there was General Harlan Voss, the once celebrated hero, now a man torn between loyalty to the Empress and his growing sense of disillusionment. The war had made him a legend, but in the quiet aftermath, he began to question what they were really building. Humanity had risen through bloodshed, but now, as it settled into the quiet of power, he found himself haunted by the faces of the dead, the people whose worlds had been burned to ensure the Empire's rise. Voss knew better than anyone that peace was fragile. The Seraphim, the synthetic beings whose cold intellect had once been a symbol of galactic progress, now moved in the shadows, preparing for a confrontation that would make the wars of the past seem insignificant. They were more than just machines. They were a collective intelligence, and their hatred for humanity ran deep. They had studied humanity's every move, learned from every victory, and now, they were ready to strike. The Shatterers of Irith, too, were preparing. They had never forgotten the humiliation of their fall, and their rage had been smoldering for decades. Deep within the Irith Nebula, the last remnants of their once proud empire gathered in secret. Their warlords, brutal and unforgiving, spoke of revenge, a revenge not just for their fallen empire, but for the insult of humanity's existence. The Shatterers were not mere conquerors. They were merciless, driven by a need to reclaim their place in the galaxy and to erase humanity's rise as if it had never happened. Yet, amidst this brewing storm, an unexpected force began to emerge. In the depths of the fragmented realms, a leader rose, not from the elite ranks of the military or the political councils, but from the dust and rubble of the colonies themselves. Alicia Core, a former engineer turned revolutionary, had become a voice for the oppressed, a symbol of hope for those who felt forgotten by the Empire. She spoke of freedom, of a future where humanity would no longer be bound by the chains of war and conquest. Her ideals were radical, but they resonated with those who had grown tired of being pawns in a game they never wanted to play. Alicia's movement, known as the Liberation Front, spread quickly across the Outer Rim, challenging the Phoenix Legion's grip on the colonies. They were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting for autonomy, for the right to decide their own fate. Their ranks swelled with defectors, former soldiers, engineers, and even politicians who had grown disillusioned with the Empire's methods. Empress Valros, feeling the pressure from both within and without, knew that the time for diplomacy was running out. The Empire needed to either crush the rebellion in its infancy or risk seeing it spread like wildfire across the galaxy. But how could she justify more bloodshed? How could she continue to rule as the empress of an empire built on war and fear, when the very people she sought to protect were now rising against her? The tension in the capital grew palpable. In the throne room, Empress Valros sat alone, her gaze fixed on the vast expanse of stars visible through the massive windows. Her hand rested on the cold, metal surface of the royal desk, and for a moment, she was not an empress, but a woman who had borne the weight of countless lives lost. Could she hold the empire together? Could she tame the storm that was coming? It was then that a messenger arrived, breathless and urgent, bearing a report from the front lines. The Liberation Front had struck at Vortis 5, a key colony rich in resources. The battle had been brutal, and the losses were catastrophic. The rebellion had gained a major victory, and their forces were marching toward Vinier Prime, the heart of the Phoenix Legion's industrial power. The storm was no longer a distant threat, it was at the gates. In the shadows of the galactic wars, alliances were shifting, enemies were regrouping, and the Phoenix Legion faced an uncertain future. Empress Valros had to make a choice. Would she unleash the full force of her empire upon the Liberation Front, risking an all-out civil war? Or would she seek a different path, one that might offer peace, but at the cost of her throne? The galaxy was waiting, its future hanging in the balance, and above it all, the stars watched in silence, as humanity's destiny was once again forged, this time not by the flames of war alone, but by the choices of its leaders. Would you like to continue exploring the growing conflict between the factions, or perhaps focus on a key character's journey through these tense times? Here's the next chapter, where the tension between the factions reaches a boiling point and the future of humanity is decided in a series of decisive actions. Part 5, The Final Reckoning. The galaxy had become a powder keg, and the spark that would ignite it had already been lit. As the Liberation Front marched on Vinier Prime, the heart of humanity's industrial might, the cracks in the Phoenix Legion grew wider. Empress Naya Valros stood at the precipice of a decision that could either secure her empire or send it crashing into the abyss. She had built an empire from nothing, But now, she was at risk of losing it all, not to alien forces or ancient foes, but to her own people. The rebellion, led by Alicia Corr, had struck with precision and ferocity, utilizing guerrilla tactics and the weapons of war humanity had grown all too accustomed to. Vinier Prime, a bustling hub of production and technology, was no longer the symbol of the Phoenix Legion's might. It was a fortress under siege, its once impenetrable defenses crumbling under the pressure of the rebel assault. 4 weeks, the battle had raged. Voss, who had once fought with unshakable loyalty to the Empress, now found himself in the midst of the chaos, questioning everything. He had been dispatched to hold Vinier Prime, but every day that passed, the faces of the civilians, the soldiers, and the defectors blurred. He no longer saw them as enemies or allies, but as victims of a system that had failed them. General Voss. A voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Commander Lena Ceres, his most trusted officer. Her face was hardened, eyes shadowed with the burden of the endless war. The outer defenses are falling. The Liberation Front has taken the lower levels. If we don't act soon, we'll lose control of the entire colony. Voss stood in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. It was no longer just a battle for Vinier Prime. It was a battle for the soul of humanity. The choices he made now would determine whether they remained a unified empire or splintered into 1,000 fractured pieces. What if we could end this without more bloodshed? Voss said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ceres looked at him, her eyes narrowing. End it how? Before Voss could respond, a transmission came through, a direct line from Empress Valrose herself. Empress Valrose's voice echoed through the comms room, cold and commanding, though tinged with a desperation that had not been there before. General Voss, you are to hold Vinier Prime at all costs. The Liberation Front must be crushed. There is no room for negotiation. Her tone was firm, resolute, but Voss could hear the undercurrent of uncertainty. The weight of a leader stretched to the breaking point. Do not fail me, General, she added, before the transmission cut off. Ceres turned to Voss, her expression unreadable. She's asking for everything, isn't she? Voss nodded. The Empress's command was not just about holding the colony, it was about crushing the rebellion completely, stamping out any hope of peace. It was a move that could end the war once and for all, or it could doom humanity's future forever. Meanwhile, on the edge of the fragmented realms, Alicia Corr stood on the deck of a rebel cruiser, looking out at the stars. The war had taken its toll, but it had also brought them closer to victory. They had pushed the Phoenix Legion to the brink, and now, with Vinier Prime in sight, she felt the weight of their struggle more than ever. We have to win this, Alicia said to her closest advisor, Rivik Dinar, a former officer in the Legion who had defected to the rebellion. The Empress won't give up the throne without a fight. If we don't break her hold on the core worlds now, it will be years before we have another chance. Dinar was quiet for a moment, then spoke, his voice a low murmur. The Phoenix Legion is not just an army, Alicia. It's an idea, a belief. People follow Valrose because they believe in the empire she's built. If we crush her, we risk becoming the very thing we're fighting against. Alicia stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. She had spent so many years fighting for freedom. But the question now was, what would freedom look like? Then we give them a choice, she said quietly, a chance to rebuild, not under the weight of war, but under something new. Back on Vinier Prime, as the battle raged in the lower levels, Voss made his decision. He knew the Empress would never accept a surrender, never agree to a peaceful resolution, not unless he made the ultimate sacrifice. In a moment of clarity, Voss ordered a ceasefire. Hold your fire, Voss's voice echoed through the comms. Ceres froze, disbelief in her eyes. General, what are you doing? We need to negotiate, Voss said. If we fight any longer, we'll destroy what's left of this colony, and the rebellion will never end. I'm not going to be part of an empire that crushes its own people for the sake of power. As the orders were passed through the ranks, confusion and tension rippled through the ranks of the Phoenix Legion. Many soldiers, like Ceres, were loyal to the Empress above all else. Others, like Voss, began to see the futility of the war they were fighting. On the rebel side, Alicia received word of the ceasefire. She stood in the shadow of the battleship Vanguard, her breath catching in her throat. Was this the chance she had been waiting for, or was it a trap? The final confrontation came swiftly. In the heart of Vinier Prime, General Voss met Alicia Corps in a neutral zone, a place where the war had already scarred the city beyond recognition. The stench of death and destruction filled the air, but amidst it stood two leaders, each representing a different vision for humanity's future. "We don't have to destroy everything," Voss said, his voice steady. "We can rebuild, together, but not through war, not through bloodshed." Alicia's gaze softened for a moment, the weight of her own journey reflected in her eyes. "And what do you propose, General? That we trust the Empress? She built an empire on fear and destruction. How do we trust that it won't just start all over again?" Voss took a deep breath. "I can't speak for the Empress, but I can speak for what I believe is right. We have a chance here, Alicia, a chance to change everything." As they spoke, the fate of humanity hung in the balance. The galaxy had been forever changed, and now, the choices of these two leaders, one a symbol of rebellion, the other of the Empire, would determine whether the war would finally end, or whether the flames of conflict would rise once more, consuming everything in their path. And above them, the stars continued to watch, silent, indifferent, as humanity's destiny was forged in the fires of war, and tempered by the will to survive. Would you like to delve deeper into the aftermath of this pivotal moment, or explore the consequences of their choices on a galactic scale? Here's the next chapter, where the consequences of the ceasefire unfold, and humanity's future is shaped by the choices of its leaders. Part 6: The Dawn of Rebirth. The ceasefire had been an unexpected turn in a war that seemed destined to continue indefinitely. On Vinier Prime, the battle had paused, but the tension in the air was palpable, as both the Phoenix Legion and the Liberation Front waited for the next move. In the shattered heart of the colony, General Voss and Alicia Corps stood as the reluctant architects of a new future, a future neither side had imagined. As the hours passed, emissaries from both sides gathered in a neutral enclave, a crumbling structure at the heart of the once great city. The smoke from the ruined buildings still lingered in the air, mixing with the distant echoes of battles fought and lives lost. But in the midst of the devastation, a fragile thread of hope began to weave through the conversations of the leaders. The galaxy had been consumed by war for far too long. The dream of an empire, once glorious in its vision, had become a nightmare of oppression, fear, and endless conquest. And the rebellion, despite its ideals of freedom, had often resorted to the same tactics: violence, sabotage, and bloodshed in its quest for justice. But now, the people of Vinier Prime and the soldiers of both sides were caught in an uneasy limbo. The question remained, what was the true cost of peace? Could the galaxy rebuild without repeating the mistakes of the past? Empress Valros, watching the events unfold from her throne room, knew that her empire was on the brink. She had received word of Voss's actions, his disobedience, his decision to parley with the rebels, and she felt the weight of her choices crushing down on her. She had built her empire on strength, on the idea that the Phoenix Legion would rise above all. She had crushed alien empires, decimated rival factions, and bent the will of countless colonies to her command. But now, she faced something far more insidious, a rebellion from within, a challenge not just to her rule, but to the very idea of the empire she had created. Valros stood before the massive viewports in her private chambers, staring out at the stars. The Phoenix Legion had once seemed invincible, but now, even the stars themselves felt distant, cold. She had been a leader forged in war, her legacy built upon conquest and survival. But the galaxy had changed, and so had she. What now? She muttered to herself. In the neutral enclave on Vinier Prime, the ceasefire held, and talks began. Voss, with his military background and newfound skepticism, represented the old order, but his heart leaned toward a different path. Alicia, the fiery revolutionary, held on to the ideals of freedom and autonomy. But she, too, realized that a fractured galaxy could never truly be free. The emissaries sat around a table, the tension thick between them. The Phoenix Legion representatives, hardened and loyal to the Empress, glared at their rebel counterparts. But the words of General Voss, urging negotiation and peace, slowly began to shift the tone of the discussion. Perhaps, Voss began, his voice cutting through the silence. We have spent too long trying to tear each other apart. We were once enemies, but we are all humans. We have fought for power, for survival. But what will we do now? Will we rebuild this galaxy through more bloodshed, or will we lay the groundwork for something better? Alicia Kor leaned forward, her gaze intense. And how do you propose we rebuild, General? After everything the Empress has done, after the blood of countless innocents has been spilled, do you think she will let us walk away from this? Voss met her gaze steadily. No, I don't expect the Empress to step down easily, but I also don't believe this is just about her anymore. This is about all of us, about humanity's future. Alicia hesitated, the weight of her rebellion pressing on her heart. Her people had suffered, had bled for their cause. How could she offer them peace when so many had died fighting for a different future? But she knew that continuing the war would mean the destruction of everything they had fought for. The galaxy was already a place of ruin. Perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to build something new. As the talks continued, Empress Valros finally made her move. She understood the stakes, and despite her desire to maintain control, she could see that the time for war was fading. She sent a personal envoy, an old confidant, Lord Valancourt, once a key strategist in the war against the alien races, and coincidentally, Alicia's estranged father, to Vinier Prime to represent her. Valros's message was clear: the Empire would negotiate, but only on her terms. The meeting between Voss, Alicia, and Lord Kor was tense. The space between the rebel leader and the Empress's envoy crackled with an uneasy energy. It was clear that the galaxy's fate was about to be decided not by soldiers, but by words. You come here with an offer of peace, Alicia said, her voice tight with suspicion. But how can we trust you? Your empire has crushed worlds, exterminated alien species, and turned your own people into weapons of war. Lord Kor's gaze was steady, his voice calm. I am not the Empress, and I carry no illusions about her intentions. But this war cannot go on forever. If we are to survive, we must find common ground. The Empress will not relinquish power easily, but she will listen. I ask that you take this opportunity, for the good of all our people. Voss watched them both, knowing that this moment would determine the future. Peace was fragile, but it was possible. We are at a crossroads, he said. We can choose to continue this war, destroying everything in our path, or we can begin to rebuild, not as enemies, but as the future of humanity. The choice is ours. Alicia stood, her heart pounding. She had dreamed of this moment for years, but the cost of peace was higher than she had ever imagined. The lives lost, the suffering endured. Could she really stand down? I will agree to peace, she said quietly, but only if the Empress is willing to sign a new agreement, one that ensures no more oppression, no more bloodshed. If we are to build a new future, it must be built on equality, not control. Lord Kor's eyes softened slightly. We can arrange that, but the Empress will need to hear it directly from you. And so, the stage was set. The negotiations were fraught with tension, but they marked the beginning of a new era, one that could either see the rebirth of humanity as a force for peace, or fall into another cycle of endless conflict. The future was uncertain, and the scars of the past would never fade completely, but in the hearts of Voss and Alicia, there was a glimmer of hope, a hope that humanity could rise from the ashes of war, and this time, forge a future not forged in silence or crowned in war, but one that embraced the promise of peace. Would you like to explore the aftermath of the peace talks, or perhaps delve into the internal struggles that each character faces in navigating this new era? Here's the next chapter, where the aftermath of the peace talks begins to take shape, and the delicate balance between the old empire and the new rebellion begins to shift the fate of the galaxy. Part 7, The Weight of Peace. The ceasefire had led to something neither side had ever fully anticipated, a fragile peace. A new dawn broke across the war-torn world of Vinier Prime, its horizon marred by the scars of battle but tinged with the first light of hope. The air was heavy with uncertainty, yet for the first time in years, the sound of gunfire had ceased, replaced by the quieter hum of negotiations. The galaxy, long caught in the tempest of war, held its breath. Empress Valros had agreed to meet Alicia Kor face to face. The rebel leader, despite her many victories, had never dreamed this moment would come. The Phoenix Legion was an empire built on power, and she had never believed that the Empress would accept the possibility of peace, not unless it was on her own terms. Yet here she was, about to step into the heart of the empire to discuss the future of humanity. The meeting was to take place aboard the Imperial Dreadnought, a massive ship that had once been a symbol of the Empire's military might. Now, it would serve as a backdrop for an entirely different kind of war, a war of words, of compromise, and of the struggle to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. Empress Valros sat in her throne room, a place she had long considered her domain. The room, cold and imposing, echoed with the sounds of distant warships on patrol. The bright stars beyond the viewports felt distant, almost unreachable, like a future she wasn't sure she could attain. The Empress was alone, save for a small, silent cadre of her most trusted advisors. But even they knew that the woman before them, the ruler who had forged this empire, was a different leader now. The choice between maintaining control or embracing change was no longer an abstract concept. It was real, and it was here. When the doors opened and Alicia Kor entered, a murmur of surprise rippled through the room. The rebel leader, once a mere symbol of resistance, now stood on equal footing with the Empress herself. Alicia had seen the horrors of war, and despite her idealism, she had witnessed firsthand the cost of leadership. The two women locked eyes for a long moment, the weight of history between them. "You came," Valros said, her voice steady but edged with something more human than the warlord she had once been. "I expected you to make demands. It seems we've both learned that words can be as powerful as weapons." Alicia didn't flinch. "Words are powerful, but actions speak louder. Your Majesty, I came to speak not of victory, but of survival. For both of us. For all of us." Valros's gaze softened, though the weight of her crown, and the blood on her hands, was never far from her mind. "You think I don't understand survival, Alicia?" "I think," Alicia said, choosing her words carefully, "that we have both learned what survival costs. The difference is, I still believe there's something worth saving, something more than the throne." The negotiation table was set. Representatives from both sides filled the room, and an uneasy silence loomed. The Phoenix Legion was composed of hardened generals, diplomats, and advisors who had served Valros for years, while the Liberation Front brought their own seasoned fighters, strategists, and a few defectors from the Empire who had joined the rebellion long ago. Alicia took her seat, her heart pounding. This was it. This was the moment that would determine the fate of not just the colonies, but the galaxy itself. The first hour of talks was tense. Valros's advisors pushed for harsh terms, demanding that the rebellion lay down its arms completely and submit to a new order, one where the Empire would retain ultimate control over the core worlds. But Alicia held firm, refusing to accept anything less than a true reformation of the Empire. "The galaxy cannot be ruled by force anymore," Alicia declared, her voice unwavering. "The people will not stand for it. They want something better, something more than the violence we've known." The Empress was quiet for a long moment, and the room fell still. Finally, Valros spoke, her voice low and measured. "And what do you propose, then?" Alicia looked around the room, the weight of countless lives lost, on both sides, pressing on her shoulders. "A new government, one with representation from all sectors, not just the elite. A government where each colony has a say in its own future. A council where the military no longer controls everything. No more wars of conquest." It was then that General Harlan Voss, still deeply scarred by the violence he had witnessed and enacted, stood up. He had remained silent during the early part of the talks, but now, he couldn't remain in the shadows any longer. "Perhaps it is time to give the people what they deserve," he said, his voice gravelly, shaped by years of war. "But the question remains, can we trust each other enough to make this work?" Valros looked at him, her eyes narrowing, but there was a flicker of something in her gaze, a recognition of the man she had once fought alongside, and now, perhaps, would have to work with. "Trust," Valros said softly. "It is the hardest thing to give away, and it may be the hardest thing to earn back." 4 days. The negotiations continued. There were arguments, compromises, and painful concessions from both sides, but in the end, they had no choice but to try. The Empire would no longer be ruled by a single tyrant. It would be governed by a coalition of elected officials from the colonies, the military, and representatives of the rebellion. The Phoenix Legion would retain its core structure, but its influence would be tempered by the new council's authority. A ceasefire was agreed upon for all current conflict zones, and both sides would work toward demobilizing their forces, starting with the heavy machinery that had once been the backbone of the Empire's military strength. It was not the perfect peace that many had hoped for. There were those on both sides who felt betrayed, and the scars of war ran too deep to heal quickly. But it was a start, and it was all they had. 6 months later. The galaxy had begun to shift. The once vast empire was now a coalition, a fragile union held together by the delicate threads of diplomacy. It was not a perfect peace, nor was it the end of all conflict. But something new had been born, something that no longer thrived on bloodshed. Empress Valros, now no longer the absolute ruler, had assumed a ceremonial role as the figurehead of the empire, while Alicia Kor served as the first elected representative of the new government. Together, they stood before a new council, one that spanned the breadth of the galaxy and gave voice to those who had never been heard. The galaxy had been forged in war, but now, it would be rebuilt, slowly, carefully, and with the hope that, one day, the cycle of destruction would be broken forever. Would you like to explore the challenges of maintaining peace in this new era, or focus on the personal journeys of key characters as they navigate their new roles in the evolving galaxy?